Okay guys, we are going to work on our next set of hand stitches, and this is going to be the blanket stitch on one side and the slip stitch on the other side. And this is our muslin that is 9.5 inches wide and 10 inches tall, and you've pulled threads a 1/2 inch from one end. This will be for our blanket stitch, and on the other side we've also pulled a thread at a 1/2 inch and then another thread at 1.5 inches. So just so that we don't see these marks, I'm just actually going to flip it right over and we'll start. So this is what your muslin will look like. You can see I've got my threads pulled, it goes all the way through. We're going to start with the blanket stitch. So everything that we need, we've got our muslin, I've got scissors, I've got pins and needles, thread, pencil, drafting ruler, and I also have my iron ready to go. So I have got a good long piece of thread ready to go on my needle, and again I just want one ply of thread, so I'm going to have this little tail kind of hanging here, just one ply, and we're going to start with the blanket stitch. So I'm just going to turn my muslin sample sideways, and we're just dealing with that side that just has the 1/2 inch pulled. So what we want to go ahead and do is mark our stitch length first so that we have a point to sew on. So I'm going to get my drafting ruler and set that up right on my pulled grain line. And again, this is on the side that is 10 inches long. So let's go ahead and mark at 1/4 inch. And I'm going to put a little dot. I don't really want to see this later, so don't use pen, definitely use a pencil. You could use a little piece of chalk. It's preferably something that's going to rub away. And so if you don't know where the 1/4 inch is on your ruler, I suggest you go back to the video I posted on how to read a ruler, or that's easily something you can Google. But you're going to get 1/4 inch marked all the way across. So this is going to be a lot of little tiny dots. Okay? A blanket stitch is normally a stitch that's sort of a decorative edge finish, and typically it would be sewn using a heavier duty thread, even like yarn. You literally see it on the ends of blankets sewn in yarn. It's a way to finish an edge. It's kind of decorative, a little crafty. You'll see it on the edge of wallets in like leather lace. You would not typically see it in one ply of regular sewing thread. So we're definitely going to be doing something a little bit different, but I just didn't want you to have to buy something entirely different to do this project. So we're just going to use our one ply of thread, but again, typically you would use something a lot thicker, which I actually think would make the stitch easier. So sorry, we're going to learn it this hard way first, and then if you ever do it again, you'll probably do it with heavier thread. So what we do with this one, I am going to let us tie a little knot on the end. Just so that it doesn't come through. I think the hardest part of this stitch is getting started, so I don't want to pull it right through and that be a tangle for us. So I'm just going to take my thread and see how I just tie like a knot on itself and pull it through. And this is one baby knot. I can double it by just pulling a knot on itself and just gliding it right back along. Now I've got a little double knot. That should be fine, hopefully, for it not to come right through our hole. And we're going to start from behind. So I'm holding my muslin like this, but my stitch is going to come from underneath my fabric. So I'm going to go at my first dot here, and I'll pull all the way until it stops, because now I'm hitting my knot there, okay? And the next stitch I'm going to do is I'm going to go up at the top just about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch from the edge. I'm really, really close to the edge, okay? And I can come almost all the way through so that I've still got like a loop right here, okay? So I'm coming through the back. So now I'm in the back. I will come through that exact same hole that I went through before, where my knot is, and I'll come through. And as you see, I've come through this loop that I created. So it's almost like I've got a little crisscross here of my first stitches. Ultimately, I'm just kind of locking this first stitch in place, and what I want to have happen is that I've got my thread on the front of my fabric and at the top. Okay, this will start to make more sense as we go. So if you need to go back and watch me do that again, please do. I'll also post another video of someone else doing this so you can watch their techniques. But the idea is that we've got thread at the top, and right now it's in the front of us. So now I will drop this down and I'll come around from the back again. So I'm coming from the back right through my next notch, and I'll pull all the way, but I want to have, again, a little loop at the top. See how there's a loop here? And what I'm going to do every single time, the way that I'm going to make this decorative stitch, is I take this thread and I'm going to go through that loop and pull it until this kind of happens. Basically, the goal of this is to have a nice even tension, and you'll have a line of thread that runs across the top of your fabric, your frayed edge. Imagine that this is a way to finish the edge. I'm going to do another stitch and show you, and hopefully it'll start coming together. So I come from behind, almost all the way, and I've got a loop up at the top there, and I go through the loop. Oops. There we go, and you could see it starting to take shape now. So I've actually got a line of thread that's going to float just along the top here. I'm going to do a few more stitches, and I think it'll be easier as you see it come together. And yes, the goal here is to have not tension that's so tight that it pulls, and not so loose that you can't kind of see this pretty stitch starting to take shape. And you can sort of move these loops and make adjustments, but this is what you'll end up having. So again, I'm going to come through the back and then make sure I don't pull too tight, and I go through this loop here. And see how it's catching it every single time. I'm going through the loop. And you can go back and kind of move these around and make sure, again, your tension is nice and it looks nice and even. So, from the back, through the loop. You definitely want to get a really long piece of thread for this if you can, because I can already see that I am going to run out of thread even after just a few stitches, because I really don't have much left and it's using quite a bit. So I'm coming from the back and I'm going through this loop every time. I feel like once you kind of get it started and going, you get the hang of it pretty quickly, but it's that first kind of initial getting it started where you run into issues. And then, like I said, it's just kind of tweaking your tension, making sure that you're not pulling too much in either direction. So see how I can go back and try to kind of make that a little more even. And so you can also kind of imagine if this was with a heavier yarn or heavier thread, you might be able to even just see how it would sit on the edge of your fabric a little better. It's kind of getting a little ugly. Trying to tweak it as I go. Making sure I get these loops before I pull it too accidentally tight. Get a little more thread there. And I've got a good amount done, but I've still got lots more to go. From the back, going through the loop before you tighten it. Just kind of never really keeping it too tight, just like a perfect amount of loose tension. And I have just about run out of thread with my sample. But this is pretty much what I want you to have. You can continue on. I'll figure out exactly the amount of thread that you need, hopefully, so you can do this. But see, now I can just go back through and kind of hopefully move some of these around so that it looks nice and even. There we go. And I have this sort of loose float of a thread on top. It looks the same on the back. Again, hopefully nice and even. You can kind of move it and make adjustments. And then when you get to the end, here you can just leave your little tail hanging, and this is just for you so that later you can figure out how you started this stitch. And then same here, I would really only do that one little knot so that you can always take it apart and figure out how you did it, but with yours just continue. So I did about almost half of mine with a 1/4 of an inch stitch length and the blanket stitch. Okay, so try to make it nice and neat and even, and that's your one stitch down. You just need a whole lot more thread than I started with. And then the next stitch we will work on is the slip stitch. And so this stitch is a hemming stitch. This is how I would hem a skirt or hem a pair of pants, something like that, where you want a nice looking edge of your fabric where you don't see any fray and it's sort of substantial and holds itself pretty well. So slip stitch is a super common stitch. It's how we're going to hem most things. So what we're going to do is a double turn. We're going to turn our fabric once and then turn it again. And that's where we're going to sew, basically. So this way you've got no fray coming out. So that's why we pulled 2 different lines here. So what I'm going to do, let me make sure my iron is nice and hot. Kind of move it around, make sure it's going. So we're going to take our side here where we've got a 1/2 inch pulled and a 1.5 inch pulled. And the first thing we're going to do is just turn that 1.5 inches and press it. Okay, so that's a great thing about an iron. Look, it holds it really, really well. I just put a little bit of pressure on that and it's turned over right where I wanted it. It's locked in place. A lot of times using the iron to make sure you iron it properly before you sew is how you're going to just set yourself up for success. So I've turned this over once. Imagine this is like the bottom of my pant leg or the bottom of my skirt. If I was to hem it right now, I would still always have that fray, even if I see it, from this side, and I would say, oh, that looks pretty, you know, it's not a frayed edge, but you would always have this fray kind of on the inside, and it would sometimes come down, or when you put your leg through it, you would kind of like knock on it a little bit. So we would want to do a double turn to make it really extra secure. So we've turned it up that 1/2 inch. Now basically we're turning it up 1 additional inch. So at that 1.5 inch line. So I'm going to fold right on that line that we pulled, and I'm going to press it again. And again, just a little bit of heat, it locks it in place. Look, it's not even moving. It's like already practically done. Easy. So again, imagine this is the hem of your pants or your skirt. It's usually what you see. You can kind of see through it. It makes it like a nice substantial hem that falls really nicely. It puts some weight on the bottom. So how would we sew this in a really nice invisible way? We'll do a machine stitch later when we do our sewing machine, where we just stitch right on top of this. This is like what your jeans look like and what most things look like. But if we're going to do it by hand, we're going to do it a super couture way. So if we do this by hand, we're going to sew this invisibly with what's called a slip stitch. So I'm going to get my thread, and again, I'm going to want a good long piece. I want to make sure not to run out. And thread my needle. Okay, and then again, typically when I do a slip stitch in real life, in reality, I double up my thread, which means, again, I pull 2 pieces, I tie a little knot, and I sew 2 plies of thread as though they are 1. In this example only, I'm going to ask you to just do 1 ply of thread, and that way, again, we'll just have a little tail hanging here. This way, again, you can just easily, really quickly see what's happening if you can't remember how to do this stitch later. Okay, so we're going to start on one end. You can do the same thing as the last stitch just to make sure it doesn't come out. We can go ahead and tie a knot in the end. And I'll even double knot it, because sometimes tying one little knot, it still comes right through your hole. But a double knot should do us. So I will knot the end, this way it won't come out as I'm trying to sew. So again, a slip stitch is invisible. We don't want to end up seeing it. So in this case, this is like where I've turned. This is the inside of my fabric. Like the outside of my pants would be here, it'd be the really pretty side where you don't see anything. This would be the inside. So if I had a knot at the end, which I do, I would want to hide that knot. Usually that means I start with the knot on the inside. And what I'm going to do, if you can see, I am coming in between my fold here. I am coming right up about 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch from the edge, but coming out of that folded piece of fabric. And now when I pull my knot, it is like totally hidden. You don't even see it at all. It's literally, see, coming out of the fold of fabric. So that's something I like to do so that you never even see it. So my goal with the slip stitch is to attach this little piece to this little piece seamlessly, right? So I'm coming out of this piece right now. I'm coming out of the fold, and I want to just come straight across and pick just 1 or 2 threads. See, I've just got 1 or 2 threads there of the other fabric, and pull my super long piece of thread. So now these 2 are attached, and then I'm going to keep going. So I'm now going to come right down, just straight down, and I am going to go in to the fold with my needle. So if you can see, I'm not coming out, I am going in. See, that would be me coming out. I am sliding, gliding my needle in the fold of that fabric. And I am doing it for about 1/2 inch, and then I'm coming back out. So look and see what I did there. I have these little bits that are attaching my folded piece to my flat piece, but you don't see any of my red thread anywhere. It is hidden in the fold right in here. You could almost see the shadow of it in this folded piece. Here's what it looks like from the outside. Barely anything. All you see is your one little tiny pick of 1 or 2 threads on the outside. And if you did this in a matching color thread, you would never see that at all. It would be totally invisible. So that's our goal. So again, here I'm in the same place as when I started. I'm coming out of the fold. I'm going to go straight over to the other piece of fabric and pick 1 or 2 threads, just the, oops, I lost them, 1 or 2 threads, just the tiniest little pick. And now I'm going to come right back down, just exactly across from where I'm coming, and I'm going to glide that needle in the fold of the fabric for about a 1/2 inch. And I am eyeballing this 1/2 inch. You could definitely mark it. It would not be bad at all. Might be a really good idea to just have a light pencil or chalk mark on your folded piece at a 1/2 inch every so often. So again, now I've come out from this side. Look, I just have 2 little picks. It's like you can barely see it at all. That's the idea. The slip stitch is totally invisible. I don't see any thread floating anywhere. It's all hidden and it's all secure. So again, I'm coming out of the fold. I just go directly across, pick 1 or 2 threads, and then just come right back down. And sometimes see like you come out right away and you're like, oh no, that's not what I want. I want to go about a 1/2 inch before I come out. So just feel it. This is one of those things too. I think once you kind of get the hang of it, it gets a lot quicker and you get pretty good at it. So I'm coming and just picking 1 or 2 threads. Oops, see how I keep grabbing this bit of fabric? Sometimes that happens. And now I'm coming right across, back into the fold. And this is where it just takes a little finesse to kind of make sure I'm in the fold. And then see, I'm like, my needle is in there. I'm gliding along for about a 1/2 inch. Just wants to grab that side. There we go. So again, I just see these little tiny picks here, these little tiny picks here, but otherwise it is pretty invisible. And I want you to continue this all the way across as though you are hemming. And definitely later when we work on our real garments, oops, you will probably hem them this way. You'll either do it by machine or do it by hand. Sorry, my needle came unthreaded. So I'm just gonna thread it and you can watch me do a little bit more. But like so many things, I feel like you kind of just have to jump right in and feel it with your own hands to start really comprehending it. I usually watch a tutorial video first, but pretty quickly I try to start touching the materials so that I can make sure I'm grasping it. So I'll watch the whole video, like wrap my head around it, and then I'll go back and watch the video again, like pausing every 2 seconds while I follow along in reality. I, all the time, watch a lot of tutorial videos. I like learning new things. I like learning new techniques. So learning never stops. I enjoy it. So I feel like I've developed best practices. And even things I already know how to do, I'll forget and love to watch a video to remind myself. Okay, so see, I'm kind of just gliding along here. Again, this is just, oops, Sometimes that happens too. You pull too fast and you get a little knot. So just try to gently coax the knot out before it gets too bad. And see, I'm not turning over the piece of fabric front to back. I'm just feeling it with my fingers. So it starts to move pretty quickly. These knots just want to keep happening. I think my thread is super twisted and that's why. But again, you can see it's pretty invisible from this side. Pretty invisible from this side. I just end up with this pretty little pick all the way across. And so what I want you to do is keep going till you get to the other side. Do you want me to finish? Maybe I'll just finish. I feel like I'm so close. I'm lazy and I want to stop, so I understand if you guys feel the same thing, but I won't. I'll be nice and I'll do it with you. I'm so close. So I might as well keep going. I'll just keep watching my fingers. Let them lull you to sleep. Or maybe you're getting, getting tips on how to do this. And sometimes it goes right through like that, you know. Again, you just got to feel it. To feel when you're really in the fold of the fabric. Okay, almost getting to the end. Feel like maybe one more. And again, make sure your tension's nice and even throughout. You don't have any knots that you've got anywhere. You don't have any weird loops on the other side of the fabric that you didn't realize. So check every now and then. So again, now I'm kind of at the end. I say if you're within about a ½ inch from the end, that could be a pretty good stopping point. And then again, I would just cut this here and leave a loop. If I was doing it for real, I would tie off a knot here so it wouldn't come undone. But in this case, I'm just going to cut like a 2-inch little string so that later you can see what that looks like. So here is the inside, here is the outside. If it got all wrinkly, I could give it a nice hard press. Oh yeah. And now it looks really nice and stiff and neat. And so now you have your blanket stitch, which you'll have continued, and your slip stitch on this side. Press it really neatly. Make sure it looks just like this. Make sure it's labeled and document it and turn it in.